this session, we will have our moderator, it is Dr. Lim Mingkok. Dr. Lim Mingkok is the Advisor Communication and Information UNESCO Office in Jakarta. And he has been involved in the global campaign to promote freedom of expression, access to information, press freedom, the safety of women and men journalists, as well as the issue of impunity. He is part of the team at UNESCO that support capacity building to fight disinformation, strengthen media and information literacy, advise on media policy, and develop journalism curricula to reflect the new sustainable development goals. He holds a PhD in mass communication. So Dr. Lim Mingkok, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and I hope everybody can clearly see me and hear me. So thank you again to AIPD for organizing this Leaders Summit. And this particular session is a very interesting session and very relevant to what we are experiencing right now. And it's something that UNESCO has been working on for many years as well. It is about the media's role in combating disinformation in the era of social media. The work of combating disinformation runs into the core of what we do at promoting freedom of expression and opinion, and how to justify limitations and protecting the rights at the same time is always a question that we have whenever we launch a program or an activity. There are many lessons to be learned and the strategies to be formulated to tackle the gaps within the communication industry, as we can see right now during this pandemic. However, one fact remains unassailable. Traditional or legacy media have been called to serve the community. There has been a rise in the public's fear and concern with the tsunami of disinformation and misinformation circulating on social media platforms, along with digital threats such as identity theft, phishing, spam, and many others. This is where traditional media or legacy media can prove their credibility by providing authentic, reliable, and verifiable information, and for advocating for digital safety to raise awareness among the masses and the audience and the public. This is also a message similar from UNESCO through its various publications, research, and resources that we have produced over the years. And to join us today and to provide some insights from different countries and different environments, we have 5 speakers, all experts in their field. The first is Ms. Atsuko Okuda from ITU Asia Pacific, Mr. Zulkarnain Muhammad Yassin, Ms. Ashwini Natesan, Ms. Shahin Islam, Mr. Shamir Kumar. And to help us with the rapporteuring for today, we have Mr. Bazur Rahman and Mr. Hiren Pandit. Without further ado, do allow me to introduce our first speaker for today. She is Ms. Atsuko Okuda from the ITU Asia Pacific, where she is the regional director. Ms. Okuda is the regional director for the ITU office for Bangkok and Jakarta. And prior to her current role, she was the chief of ICT and development for the Disaster Risk Reduction Division at UNSCAP based in Bangkok from 2015 to 2020. She is currently also a research fellow at the United Nations University and Maastricht Economic and Social Research Institute on Innovation and Technology in the Netherlands. Her topic for today is redefining the role of media and redefining the role of media for digital inclusion and empowerment in Asia and the Pacific. Ms. Okuda, the time is yours.
Thank you, the moderator, for this opportunity, and I wish to thank AIBD to invite ITU to present our work and perspectives on this very important topic. Would you be able to present my presentation projects on the screen? I would like to start with my presentation with the ICT perspective and how we see the COVID-19 impact on networks and services. Thank you. Next slide, please. As you may have heard on the news, we see a quite significant increase between 2019 and 2020 because of the increased services and functions on digital platforms. So that is reflected and was enabled by the expanded networks, increased subscriptions to broadband networks, as well as the data capacity, which increased significantly. So you can see all along across its plus that we see a significant increase globally due to COVID-19. Next slide, please. However, we also see worrying trends, as you see, which is the topic of this meeting. Although many people, over 40%, still think that most likely they will share scientific content on social media, and according to this WHO studies, people tend to share the information that they are interested, 36%, or they are worried about or concerned, 28.5%, and 28%, 24%, 23%, they share articles and videos and images. This is one side of what we found on how people communicate and share social media content recently. However, I think the concern will come more on the right-hand side. We also see that there is an increase of misinformation, and that in particular impacts the acceptance of vaccination. And there is a study of a School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine of Imperial College in the UK to show that misinformation will lead to 6.2% decrease in intent to definitely accept vaccines. So we have similar findings all across. They may be very limited in terms of the evidence and time frame, but we can see a very unique pattern of social media activities. For instance, Oxford studies found that COVID-related misinformation usually is posted on YouTube, but shared on Facebook. And the graph shows the spike in the Pacific related to COVID-related information. Unfortunately, some of them are related to misinformation, and that creates and aggregates the worsen the situation because people may not know what is true and what is not when there is a massive volume of information flying around. Next slide, please. And in this context, ITU believes that number one, the digital inclusion supported by expanded digital connectivity would be the key. We need to make sure that everyone has access. We cannot stop this exercise of expanding the access simply because we are afraid of misinformation, but on the contrary, we would like to encourage the digital literacy, capacity development, and awareness to tackle the issue of misinformation. One of the initiatives that ITU has been implementing is to empower girls and women on the digital technology in the digital space. And the initiative called Girls in ICT Day celebration takes place every year on 22nd of April to encourage them to explore STEM as an academic career and to aspire to be the ICT leader in the future. So this year we organized one in Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. And because of the success, we were requested to support other countries to come. We are celebrating this event not only on 22nd of April, but throughout virtually. Next slide, please. Additionally, we have a more in-depth engagement to address the gender digital divide. And for those girls and women who joined the digital transformation to be more informed. And we would like to encourage the policymakers and regulators to create an enabling environment for them. So we have a program called Equals, a global partnership that has a different component of access, leadership, skills, and research to support comprehensively the work of governments to encourage the digital inclusion. Next slide, please. So just one quick example. We organized Equals Afghanistan, supported by the First Lady of Afghanistan, UN Women, UN resident coordinator, as well as different parts of the government to encourage and to advance the to address the gender digital divide in Afghanistan. And we hope that this will help formulate the action plan by all stakeholders to encourage girls and women to join the digital space. Next slide, please. Additionally, we believe that we need to protect the children from the harms in the form of the abuse and the exploitation. And ITU, together with partners, came up with the Child Online Protection Guidelines for industry, for educators, for policymakers, and in some cases, as you see, in cartoon, so that the messages will be easier to be internalized by children and the students. And we hope that we can work with some of you to localize and advertise and advocate the need for such interventions when we have a massive number of children and youth, girls and women joining the digital space due to COVID-19. Next slide, please.
Ms. Okuda,
Yes.
apologies to interrupt. You have 1 minute to wrap up. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. So additionally, we have an initiative called AI for Good to discuss these ethical and behavioral issues related to AI. Next slide, please. I hope that you have an opportunity to visit. We also organized information seminars on infodemic, misinformation and disinformation during COVID-19. There is a video. I hope you'll be able to watch it. Next slide, please. And this is something I would definitely want to share with AIBD. ITU developed a blog to encourage the new media and traditional media to join hands to address the disinformation and misinformation, because people regard the TV news media as the authentic source of information. So we believe that together with the broadcasting media, we will be able to address this issue more comprehensively. Next slide, please. And in order to approach the policymakers and regulators, we organize a global symposium for regulators, which is coming up from 8 to 9 June, very soon. And we hope that this is a platform to address more comprehensively what needs to be done to address these emerging challenges and opportunities. Next slide, please. Additionally, with the industry, we have an emerging technology week in July to address the implications of emerging technologies in Asia and the Pacific. Next slide, please. And finally, we published the Digital Trend in Asia and the Pacific 2021, which capitalizes and summarizes these emerging trends and opportunities in one document. And I hope that you'll have an opportunity to read, and we look forward to hearing from you any suggestions and comments from the audience. So thank you very much for giving this opportunity. Back to you.
Thank you so very much. Apologies on the tight time limit. There's so much that we can learn from what ITU is doing, which I hope we have some time in the end of our session today to come back to some of the points that you might want to expand a little bit. So thank you so much, Ms. Okuda. And now I would like to invite our next speakers. And just a quick note to all our participants, the PowerPoint presentations from all our speakers will be shared by the organizers after the end of the event. So don't worry if you miss anything, the PowerPoints will be shared. So next up is our speaker, Mr. Zulkarnain Muhammad Yassin, and he is the Chief Regulatory Officer for the Malaysian Communications and Multimedia Commission, MCMC. He started his career as an advocate and a solicitor upon graduating from University of Malaya. He has been regularly featured in the media at regional and international forum. He sits on various government committees related to cybersecurity, governance, and regulatory reform. And his topic for us today is about the role of media in COVID-19 response. Over to you, Mr. Zulkarnain.
Thank you, Dr. Lim, and fellow panelists. It is a great honor for AIDB to invite my organization and myself to be part of this interesting event. And in the interest of time, I will not go through all the slides, but I think what is critical points that in a summary of what I will be talking about is when we talk about COVID-19 and the role of the media. Now we have to take into considerations. Mr. Moderator have mentioned about the traditional media, but we also have to take cognitions that and the challenges coming from the new media, the platform providers, the social media. But the landscape of the traditional media in our perspective have changes with convergence. Now, what I meant is that we have seen local or traditional medias have embraced convergence, and their presence in the presence online, and also collaborating with platform providers. For example, some medias have a presence on YouTube, for example. So those are changes in the landscape of the media. So it is pertinent to note that when we talk about COVID-19 and the role of the media, four things that we need to really look at. Now, when COVID-19 appears globally, now people talk about new norms. So that is social distancing, wearing masks. Those are new things that we do. But we also need to talk when about new norms. It's not just about health and safety, but new norms for media practitioners, media's owners, and content creators. So those norms become more important. And when we talk about COVID-19 pandemic, we must not also forget about the infodemic that is equally challenging, that has an impact on the reception of the people about the vaccination program that the government, each country's government are running. It can stifle the effort that has been done. Although, for example, you have sufficient stock for the vaccine, but if the reception of the public is not there, then it, for all intent and purpose, all the resources that has been put to ensure the safety of the people against the pandemic, against COVID-19, will be impacted. So in this area, what is important is that fact-checking in terms of media role is more and more become critical. Secondly, we talk about how the media, we talk about, this is about norms, yeah. Secondly, it is about the need to be sensationalizing bias and objectivity. Those things need to have a new norms, set of norms, or what are the norms be it a content creator, producers, or the broadcasters need to look at. And the other area of importance is that now in the traditional media, we have this regulated conditions of public service announcement. So the role of public service announcement has become more and more important, and airtime of public service announcement for the broadcasters as well as other platform providers need to be enhanced, or we can see the visibility or the importance of this public service announcement. And the other area of importance is that in a fight of for COVID-19 infodemic, there must be a platform for a single point of or source of truth. So these are norms that media, government, and also the players in the industry need to look at. So let's just go straight to slide number 6, please. So I've mentioned about how Malaysia approached to fighting the infodemic related to COVID-19. Now, of course, we have I've mentioned about the single point of truth. Now, when we talk about government, there are many source of information. So it is scattered. You can get informations from, for example, Ministry of Health, or you can, there are information residing at the Ministry of Information. There are also related to law enforcement agencies, for the police, for example. And fake news are prevalent, affected all these government machineries. So if we were to ask our citizen to check each and single entity of the organizations, they were having a tough time. So our approach in this aspect is that we consolidate all related fake news pertaining to any of the agencies to a single point of reference. That's when we establish sebenarnya.my. This is where a repository of all fake news related to COVID-19 or any other related issues that concern economy, safety, as well as the social issues. Because especially when we look at the compositions of Malaysia, we are multiracial countries. So any spark of hatred, fake news on race and religion will can spark a riot. So those are social issues that we also debunk through this sebenarnya.my. And it is enormous effort, and in terms of getting all the ministries and government agencies to come together to work efficiently to disseminate or to debunk information that is fake or false. So this is
Mr. Zulkarnain, apologies to interrupt. Would you mind wrapping up in 1 minute?
Okay, sure. So all in all, what I'm saying is that looking at, we may have the platforms, but the media also, I have highlighted the 4 key items of new norms that the media practitioners and everyone using the media to embrace, so that in terms of we can increase the literacy and responsible use of the media. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Zulkarnain, for your presentation. I understand that you need to leave us a little bit early. So if you allow me to pose one question back to you. I see from the last slide that you allowed for crowdsourcing. So it means that the system that MCMC has put in place allows for a feedback loop then from perhaps the citizens and the public. But so could you elaborate a little bit about that particular aspect of the information provided by MCMC or collated by MCMC?
Okay, this is one critical information that I think where we have a channel, what we call in Malay is called salurkan kepada kami, or channel to us. So you may have, the citizens may receive WhatsApp messages or any other forms of information that they want to verify. As I've mentioned, if they need to go to many ministries, they don't know where to go. Under whose jurisdiction is that issues? So by having this crowdsourcing, people looping to us, they just need to have a single channel for them to ask questions and get feedback. So that will save the headache of finding under whose jurisdiction this issue is. So we will collate the information, we will transmit to the respective, we will channel the questions to the respective ministry and ministers to answer, and then we post it back to the person who provided the tip-off. Then we also publish in the portal, so it benefits not only the agency. In this, I see this in two perspectives. One, as an organization, we cannot monitor the media, but the public plays its roles by feeding us tip-off. So there are fake news relating to your organizations. I need some answer. So by doing that, one, we save resources in terms of it's impossible to screen the media, the type of media that we are having now. So secondly, that tip-off become public. So I think that is the beauty of having a single channel for citizens to reference.
Thank you so very much for that answer. Indeed, it is true that we do need a neutral party, a reliable source that could help collate and put us in touch with all the different information relevant on a specific topic. This is an age of information overload, so we do need that kind of role. And it's very good to hear that MCMC is playing that role as a purveyor or a connector of information. Thank you again, Mr. Zulkarnain. Now, let's continue with our next speaker. The third speaker on our panel is Ms. Ashwini Natesan from the Asia Pacific Institute for Information Technology in Sri Lanka. She is a lawyer and also a lecturer, legal practitioner specializing in technology, media, and communication laws based in Colombo, Sri Lanka. She lectures and she consults on the issues of technology, and she's also a research fellow at the Linear Asia policy think tank that focuses on the issues on data protection, privacy, AI, and the law. Her topic for today is regulation the silver bullet to combat disinformation in social media? And it's with great pleasure, please, Ashwini, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. May. I'll just start sharing my screen. So a very good afternoon and good morning, depending on where you're joining today's webinar from. I'm honored to be a part of this esteemed panel and these distinguished speakers who are speaking on areas that are of extreme and exceeding importance in the times we live in. My topic will be on regulation being the silver bullet to combat disinformation on social media. Before I move any further, I'd just like to get it out of the way that when it comes to the definition for disinformation, there is no universal consensus on what is disinformation. But we can certainly agree that in terms of disinformation and misinformation, the distinguishing factor is the intent, whether there is an intent to spread the falsified news. The absence of intent is classified as misinformation. But the definition of disinformation, misinformation in shorthand referred to as fake news is not the object of today's discussion, so I won't be going into it. We know that in today's times, where the world is grappling with a pandemic, infodemic is as crucial as is several years ago. It's not that fake news or disinformation is a new phenomenon, but with the ubiquitous nature of social media, this is certainly a concern that has been amplified by leaps and bounds. And we do understand that in a pandemic, when there is infodemic and all sorts of news being circulated, it is a cause for definite concern, and there needs to be measures to combat this infodemic. The speakers before me very rightly and aptly spoke about the various initiatives to combat this. My presentation will focus on regulation as a form to combat disinformation. I'd like to take a leaf out of Lawrence Lessig's modalities on regulating cyberspace and say that while regulation, we understand it to mean laws and legislations, that is not the only form of legislation, or that is not the only form to regulate disinformation. Legislation, while important, there are also other modalities through which we can regulate this plague called disinformation. First, let's focus on laws relating to disinformation. So the form of these laws can be a few. To name some of them, the first, you can have a specific legislation on disinformation, example of which can be the act that I mentioned in Singapore. There can also be laws and regulations that focus on platform, or what we call as intermediary liability. And an example of that is the Information Technology Rules 2021 from India. And there can also be instances where the traditional or the erstwhile laws existing in the country are being used to combat or curb disinformation. Like, for example, in Sri Lanka, the Penal Code and the Computer Crime Act are being used to curb disinformation or fake news as we would know it. Irrespective of the form, that is, regulation can be through any form of the laws that I have mentioned, but it is my endeavor to establish the fact that there are certain critical concerns when it comes to regulation through laws. The first is when it comes to criminalizing of disinformation, there are two important elements. Like I mentioned, disinformation is distinguished from misinformation on grounds of the intent, whether there was an intent. Now, not only intent is an important factor, but harm should also be considered. The other important factor, according to me, is the absolute disregard sometimes that can be given to freedoms of expression and speech. That could be as a corollary sometimes to laws that look at content moderation or laws that are looking to curb disinformation or misinformation, as the case may be. It's important that the laws do not have a chilling effect on these freedoms. And when it comes to regulating of platform providers, that is the platform intermediaries, the various social media giants, it's important to see that there can be local language as well as cultural challenges that go into it, and those must be addressed. And in my opinion, another important area is the enforcement of it. While there can be a law, the enforcement of it ought not to be on the basis of selective determination. It has to be uniform. And finally, the principles of human rights that can be applied to any law, some of which are legality, necessity, legitimacy, and proportionality, should be borne in mind. Now, yes, let's assume that these factors are borne in mind and a law is passed. Can the law in relation to disinformation curbing or combating be the silver bullet? My answer to that is no. And the reason I say that is because of the many challenges that law in itself cannot answer to. Some of those I've mentioned here, the first being accountability, to strike a balance between the accountability or the responsibility of the platform provider with that of the perpetrator of that specific information or news. The next can be the concerns or the challenges relating to unearthing the perpetrator, as I would call it, the person who has started this particular message or information that is being shared and found to be false. And this can be an amplified challenge on messaging applications where there is end-to-end encryption. And the challenge as to enforcement also needs to be borne in mind. While it's always being said, we can't overlook that. And the other concern is, of course, the various conflict between the existing laws that can come into play, compliance with which law, where the platform provider is and where the end user or the perpetrator are, again, a concern. And finally, when we look at certain legislations that have been passed for combating of disinformation, I must say, while we can't discount its importance, it's certainly important, but can we call it a game changer? I'd like to just quote by saying that while they are important and it's definitely an arsenal in the government's legislative armory, but it needs to be seen that that in itself is not the answer. So you can ask me, what is the answer? I'd like by saying that traditional media in the form of news agencies play a huge and hugely important role when it comes to market regulation. And if you just recall a few slides ago, I spoke about the various forms or modalities of regulation. And this modality of regulation through market, the role that traditional media can play is indispensable because they are the watchdogs in the society. And there are various ways through which media and journalists can contribute in curbing and combating disinformation. There are a few I've mentioned here, but due to paucity of time, I won't go into it. And I also understand that subsequent speakers who are experts in this area will be focusing on it. I'd like to conclude my presentation by saying that really there is no one silver bullet to regulate disinformation. Regulation can take several forms and it must take several forms so as to combat disinformation or misinformation. And the law and the laws are important, and I'm not saying no, but the role of market, that is the role of media and that of platform providers are crucial. And these coordinated efforts can go to make the media the vanguard of information. So I leave you with this particular
Thank you so much, Aswini.
Thank you very
much for keeping to the time. And we highly appreciate your thoughts, and we wish that we have more time to hear about it. Yes, indeed, international standards or international human rights law urges that any national laws that is made, especially during this time of COVID included, should not be at the expense of legitimate freedom of expression, legitimate criticism, and especially legitimate reporting from journalists who are working, so it's their job to report on issues. So any national laws made in this regard must be very, very careful about the limitations of such laws. Thank you again, Ashwini. So without further ado, we are going to move on to our next speaker, Ms. Shaheen Islam, who is the Director General for the National Institute of Mass Communication at the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting in Bangladesh. Ms. Shaheen is a member of the Bangladesh Civil Service. She was in the news department of the Bangladesh Ministry of Information, and also at the Economic Relations Divisions at the Ministry of Finance for a long time. She took up her current post in April 2019, and her topic for today is media's role in combating disinformation in the era of social media and the techniques for combating disinformation. So, Ms. Shaheen, the time is yours. You have 8 minutes as well. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Good day to everybody. This is Shaheen Islam from Bangladesh, welcoming you all to my topic, media's role in combating disinformation in the era of social media and techniques of combating disinformation. I'll be sharing my screen with you. Journalism is in a state of considerable flux. New digital platforms have unleashed innovative journalistic practices and enabled novel forms of communication with unprecedented increase in social media use. Information communication has attained greater global reach than at any point in history. For example, in Bangladesh, by the year 2020, October, there was over 110 million internet subscribers and almost 100 million mobile internet users using social media. Disinformation is very dangerous. During COVID-19, a tsunami has been introduced in social media, often termed as infodemic. Infodemic spreads disinformation and hoaxes that are referred to as fake news. Disinformation involves deliberate attempts to manipulate people through delivering dishonest, incorrect, and false information. Most scholars agree disinformation is a serious threat to the society, state, and a risk to public health. Disinformation and fake news leads to decline in public trust. It has often led to enforced regulations on media. Restrictive regulations on social media is very dangerous. Regulations are prone to abuse, often used to stifle legitimate dissent. According to a research report by Freedom Houseman, currently media freedom is at its lowest point in 15 years, and journalists worldwide are facing unprecedented threats. So regulations restrict freedom of expression. Journalists must find effective ways to win back people's trust. As the world faces huge chaos with the onset of COVID, now more than ever, a strong and viable news media is a must to inform citizens about current events and trends. Media's role is to provide accurate and trustworthy message and scientific information, effectively identify fake news and counter the spread of disinformation. It should invigorate cooperation among different stakeholders and facilitate people's lives and livelihoods. Governments, businesses, and consumers should work together to weaken the environment that propels disinformation across the globe. Educational institutions should promote news literacy as a priority area and develop strong professional journalism. The news industry must provide quality journalism and correct fake news using various techniques such as real name registration, use trustworthy sites, warn of dubious sites. Technology companies can invest in innovative tools identifying fake news. Research using algorithm and artificial intelligence lends considerable hope for fighting disinformation. Individuals should also follow a diversity of news sources and be more skeptical of what they read. Learning how to judge news sites and protect oneself from inaccurate information is a high priority in the digital era. Journalists should use several tools. They can identify fake news by fact-checking and social media verification using 5 C's: context, credibility, construction, collaboration, and compare. They can also apply UNESCO's media and information strategies, shortly called MIL strategies, by increasing literacy on human rights, advertising, computer literacy, attention economy, privacy, and intellectual literacy, intellectual property literacy. Apply 5 UN strategies to combat COVID infodemic, such as produce accurate information, partner with platforms, work with media, mobilize civil society, and speak out for rights. They can also strengthen online accountability by real name registration and apply litigation where justifiable limits exist. Lodging complaints to a designated authority is an effective way of addressing the problems of disinformation. A new initiative launched in South Africa, constituting civil society-led strategy to combat disinformation, can be applied. Individuals and organizations can report complaints of disinformation to a digital complaints committee supported by the Independent Election Commission, which allows online complaint to report disinformation. This has been very effective in South Africa. Combining innovation, civil society, education, and surveillance, there is we can fight disinformation. There is considerable experimentation taking place with online news platforms in today's world. News of organizations are testing tools that help identify hate speech and languages that incite violence. There's a major flowering of new models and approaches that bodes well for the future of online journalism and media consumption. Therefore, media professionals can work together with stakeholders armed with the knowledge and tools of, and I'm confident together we can fight disinformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shaheen, for that very concise presentation. And one of your comments and message about the journalists must win back people's trust stays with me quite a bit, because a lot of time as we often say, there's a whole generation of people nowadays that have not grown up with the more quote unquote traditional media and can only find news through Facebook or other social media, and may not fully understand the role of traditional journalism. And that is something that I think the media has to work on to gain back the trust and to make sure that that trust can be kept, especially we see during this pandemic, which is very important. Thank you so much, Ms. Shaheen. We'll come back to some of our other questions later on. So now let's quickly move on to our fifth and final panelist for today. Is Mr. Shamir Kumar, the head of Prasar Pradi News Service digital platform in India. Before this position, he was the CEO of Hindustan Samachar News Agency. He was the advisor and he is an advisor and seed investor to many startups in the domains of agriculture, healthcare, education, and media. And his topic for today is disinformation combating in the form of fake news busting. So perhaps some hands-on experience and practical tips from Shamir. The time is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lim. Let me start my timer as well. So before we get on to the topic, just from your city of Jakarta, I had a friend named Yudhishthir. And that reminds me of, in our greatest epic Mahabharata, there's a scene where in the middle of the war, Yudhishthira, whose honesty could be counted upon, he shouted, Ashwathama hata iti naro va kunjaro. What it meant was, Ashwathama is dead. Not sure if it's the man or the elephant. Now, his formidable enemy who was creating havoc at that point of time was none other than his teacher, Dronacharya, who had who was very fond of his son, whose name was Ashwathama. The noise in the battleground caused him to hear only the first part of the utterance from Yudhishthir, and it was enough to sink him in deep sorrow, dropping the weapons, and eventually he got killed. So this disinformation caused by the noise in the system turned to be a fake news, causing ultimate damage for this unsuspecting father. I mean, we have seen great definitions from Ms. Ashwini. She talked at length about the technical definitions, while we also heard from Ms. Shaheen, madam, that there are many things which are happening about this misinformation, which is turned to be infodemic. So in this regard, I mean, disinformation is a more generic term, and it's prevalent across almost all walks of life. I mean, some are accidental, some are by design. I mean, if you look at, for example, the South African example ma'am was talking about, that also reminds me that, rewriting colonial history has been one major endeavor across the globe to remove disinformation, which has been hindering the nation building sort of attempts in those countries. When we come to fake news, it's more pointed, and it's a popular term to name this problem which we're discussing at hand. Mr. Yassin talked about the convergence, and Okuda-sama talked about the digital inclusion. What they have done is they have made, this social media has leveraged this digital connectivity and reach. So, I mean, societies have definitely become more democratic. Ms. Ashwini's concerns are very real. And it is because the source of information is distributed. So one can pretty much argue that the fake news is inherent problem to this powerful technology. And that is why Dr. Lim, you talked about traditional or legacy media, it's been called to serve. Because we need to be carefully, we need to carefully understand and deal, and that's where the media houses, regulatory bodies, and societies at large are fighting this. So in this regard, if we look at the fake news busting efforts, especially the tsunami which got talked about during the COVID times, we have seen a massive slowdown in print and electronic media content generation as well as consumption. And it has created this huge, in a way, accelerated growth for digital news. Now with this, the menace of fake news became, it's kind of a nightmare, and it needs to be dealt with utmost emergency. So having heard all the panelists in my panel as well in the previous one, and also the inaugural address by Mayank Agrawal sir, the DJ Doordarshan, that we can sort of classify all these efforts into two groups. One, we can say the private media, and the other one will be the public broadcaster and the government efforts. So if you look at them, there's a different approach and there are different issues. So in terms of private media, like Shaheen ma'am also talked about the AI and all these tools being used. These are a lot of private initiatives which are there to combat the busting the fake news, that's the term which are being used. But there are two inherent problems to this. One is they are trying to fight this viral content. It's already gone viral. It has already done the damage. Yes, we do, even though the AI is there, but a lot of this busting is very manual in a way that we find the phone number and you call and authenticate, that way. So that's where we need to invest more into technology and get these things a lot more reliable and make the process more efficient. The other problem is with the private sort of setup is knowingly or unknowingly, they tend to lean to certain political viewpoint rather than keeping this exercise of busting fake news apolitical. Now, this biased fake news busting exercise, it takes away the credibility and thereby seriously damaging the effort. And as previous panelists have talked about, the trust to be restored by journalists. So one needs to be careful when it comes to this exercise. Now, for public broadcaster and government efforts, Mayank Agrawal sir elaborated in detail, as well as we saw Dr. Guleria talking about a digital information booklet and for fake news fighting. Even Kiran Bedi ma'am was talking about what news is being projected by media. It needs to focus on the positive. We'll come to that. But first, in terms of I liked Mayank sir talking about that negative news is the headline, but the positive news is buried somewhere, out there. And this fake news has become a parasite. So as Dr. Lim said, like, if we talk about very concrete action, so as public broadcaster here in India, in Prasar Bharati, through our TV arm, which is DD News, and through radio, which is Akashvani Samachar, AIR, popularly known as, and through our digital platform, PBNS, we have been combating fake news by running various programs on them. And Mayank sir in the morning elaborated on quite a few of them. The efforts have been multiplied for disseminating authentic COVID-related information as soon as they are available. And we are being aided by the government's effort in terms of the PIB or MyGov. And they have certainly helped in preemptively busting the rumor mongering tendencies. So, why should we do that? I'll come to that. As Ms. Ashwini was talking about what is the answer. So there is some exercise, life experience, which I can share there as well. But here, Prasar Bharati is playing a proactive and pivotal role in transparent communication about disease, about the vaccine, about the movement restrictions, and other aspects of this combat. So unlike private media, however, these efforts have to remain focused on key problems of public domain, while disinformation is a much wider issue. And to address that, Kiran Bedi's ma'am's this thing, what to read and where to go. PBNS has been producing a lot of social videos of general awareness, as well as there's a daily magazine, e-magazine we are publishing called India Fights Back. And it covers wider issues. It highlights what positive things are happening, and so that, you know, one does not get depressed just by looking at only the negative portrayal, which is probably getting enhanced much more than it should be. So now that I enter the last minute, or maybe 30, 40 seconds left, what should be the philosophy to combat fake news? See, in my first job, just after my graduation, I was a researcher and I was designing IT systems. And a very simple yet powerful lesson which I learned has shaped my approach in life to consume data. I have been a derivatives trader, and this simple approach has helped me putting profitable trades, structuring, you know, sort of workable solution for my clients in financial industry, as well as now it's helping me in designing the digital platform for India's public broadcaster. It's very simple. Capture the data at source. It's simple, yet it's not easy to implement, especially in this new domain. So in my previous job as CEO for one of the news agency, we had engaged in a preliminary exercise.
So, unfortunately, we have run out of time.
Yeah, that's fine. So that's it. So capture the data at source. Thank you.
We got your final message loud and clear: gather data at its source. And in fact, it is one of the core work of what we have to do and the media, which is always to look at the source information and not to rely on too much on secondhand or even third-hand information. And that is perhaps one of the ways that we can get the credibility of the media back. I would just like to give 30 seconds, no more, please keep this in mind, for Ashwini and also Ms. Shaheen, 30 seconds each for your final thoughts on this issue.
Thank you. Do you want me to answer the question that was on chat, or just my final thoughts?
Your final thoughts on that is as fine as well, which is something to do with children and protection of children and how the law pertains to them if they happen to be spreading this information.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ming. I've seen the question, and I think it's an excellent question and one that requires a lot of attention. First, the applicability of laws to adolescents depends on the definition of child within that law. That in itself is a challenge. Sometimes if they are below the age of 18, there can be difficulties in applying the law. The other thing is to blindly apply a law on adolescents can, as the question itself says, be very detrimental to their mental health. So we need to think of reformatory mechanisms. Code, in my opinion, is then the law that we have to look at, and also market regulation. So don't rely just on the legislation, because that can have repercussions that go beyond what meets our eye. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So when it comes to with children, don't be too rigid about that. 30 seconds for Ms. Shaheen as well, because of your role right now, perhaps something on children. And then we'll move on to Ms. Okuda for last 30 seconds. Ms. Shaheen, your mic is muted.
Thank you. We see the children are mobiles always sharing news. We would just have to aware the children that all you see may not be true. So it's better before sharing, you take some time, you check if it's not possible for you to check, you ask, you look around and search whether it's what the source is trustworthy, or whether it's okay to share, because it is really dangerous. We have to make our children.
Okay, and I think there is a bit of a lag there. So Ms. Okuda, just 30 seconds, your final thoughts on the topic.
Thank you. I think it was very timely, very rich discussion, and I look forward to working with you, policymakers and traditional media, so that we can address this issue while encouraging the digital inclusion of everyone. Thank you. Back to you.
Well, I couldn't have said it better, to have digital inclusion for everyone. And indeed, this is a topic that would require a whole day of discussion, even a whole week and a whole month of discussion. And unfortunately, we only have one session today, but I really look forward to working with AIBD and all our speakers today, perhaps on another day and another session, another event that is dedicated to this topic. My thanks again on behalf of AIBD to all our speakers today, and for all our viewers and audience who have been joining us for the past hour and a little bit more. So with that, thank you everybody, and I return the time back to the organizer. Thank you.